Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Hey everyone, thank you for listening and watching our podcast. We want to ensure that we are creating the most relevant and useful content for our audience across the network. It's crucial to us that we are delivering to you more of what you want to hear and learn about. Please take a few minutes to complete our listener survey so that we can craft content based on your needs. Please visit securityweekly.com/survey to submit your feedback. Again, I had nothing to do with that survey, so if you don't like it, don't email me. Email someone else. Or tell me and I'll forward it along. How about that?
Wow, you're nice.
I know, right? Hey, Tyler and I went to ShmooCon.
And all you got was this lousy t-shirt. Wait,
no, I didn't even get. Did you get a t-shirt? I didn't get a t-shirt. I got a moose. I got a stuffed moose in a mug in a really nice toiletry bag. Like, I don't know. I was kind of actually those were all three pretty nice gifts. I gave the stuffed animal to my youngest son because he's still into that kind of thing. And
you kept the tumbler for yourself.
Oh, I totally kept the tumbler for myself and the toilet. I needed a new toiletry bag. The zipper was broken on my old one, and now I got a new one.
Nice.
And it was awesome.
Gotta love when conference swag is useful.
The other bags, though, my wife was proud of me. I was proud of myself. Did you take those home, Tyler? Like, I got the bags with the ShmooCon bags with the swag.
Left them with me.
Yeah, I was like, no, no. I have a house full of that stuff, and it just gets thrown out, and I have way too many bags. And I was like, see, I told my wife, like, I didn't bring home any bags with crap in it. Was there anything good in there?
But,
it's the same. It's the notebook, the squishy thing, like maybe some mints. That's usually what you get, right? In the attendee
I don't know.
bag.
I haven't even opened them yet.
Mm-hmm.
See, I just got home, so
yeah, you did.
You're still in the suitcase.
You had a much longer commute home than I did.
What happened, Tyler? Like, seriously?
I was in an endless loop of I was not going to make the connection. They had one flight out of DC area to get to my connection airport, and it was too tight because they kept delaying in DC, so they would reschedule me the next day to try again, and they kept delaying the next day. So that's how
Tyler went to the airport together because I was like, I'll go a little. I was the one, like, I'd be a little early. Tyler was like probably right on time, and so I was like, well, let me hurry and finish my two martinis, my second martini before we go to the airport. And Tyler had a much worse time. I had another Bloody Mary when I got to the airport and a gin and tonic on the plane.
That's only a short flight.
It is.
You got a gin and tonic and a nap?
And a nap, gin and tonic. No, because the gin and tonic, there was going to be turbulence, which...
Oh, good idea to have more alcohol.
I was worried about because I had consumed a lot of alcoholic beverages before I got on the plane. I'm like, oh no. I'm like, I hope I don't get plane sick. This could be really ugly. And she's going, anything to drink before we take off. And I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
Gin and tonic, please. And then she's like, you have to finish that before we take off because we have turbulence. Obviously, I'm laying the cat out of the bag.
Challenge accepted.
That I flew first class because I
You're old.
I'm old. So I'm like, you know what? Even though it was a short flight, and I was like, all right, I downed my gin and tonic, and then I took a nap. I woke up briefly as we were, the oxygen mask. No, just kidding. Woke up briefly, put my oxygen mask on, and then went back to sleep.
Second day, I randomly picked a city that was a big hub and made sure that I got on the plane after I had them pull my bag and found another place I could fly out of.
And I feel bad, yeah. I feel bad because Tyler had like the very opposite experience traveling home than I did.
But to be fair, ShmooCon was amazing. Like this year's ShmooCon feeling, to kind of wrap it up, like it was very much very close to all the people you want to see, very DerbyCon-like, where it was kind of back to the same level of crowds.
I felt like, yeah. I
Good
felt
talk.
like the community was back at this conference. And I mean, you guys know me really well.
Vibe was much
I'm
better.
not one to like get mushy about conferences all the time and stuff like that, but like I was kind of I was emotional going into it, and like I was emotional there and emotional like I was like, wow, this is like just blessed to be a part of it all. Right?
It was and I wasn't there, but I get the feel that it was very much. It's time for folks to come out of the woodwork a little bit and reconnect, because we're at a much better place where we were.
Yes.
Almost 3 years ago.
Yes.
And everybody was doing that. That was like, we had the LobbyCon going full swing. It was very much the
I
vibe.
did not eat the Batman cereal. There was Batman cereal from
Grifter, come on, man! Like that was the
Batman
worst.
cereal from 1989. Grifter breaks out Batman. I saw the box in the lobby.
Did you smell it?
No, I
God.
saw the box when he still had it in shrink wrap, and there was like a plastic Batman on the front of it, and I just thought, like, you know, people at the con, they're in LobbyCon, they put like, you know, cool, weird stuff on the table while they get their laptops out and they're hacking. I just thought it was like a decoration. And Tyler and I went out. Shout out to Paul Batista at Polarity, right? So we went to this awesome restaurant, drank that was the theme. Awesome restaurant, tons of whiskey. And the second night, awesome restaurant, tons of whiskey.
Batman cereal.
And the Batman cereal came out, I think, while we were at the thing.
Tyler, I wasn't there, but I can smell it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know what that smells.
Like, remember
someone,
it, right? It tastes horrible in '89.
Yeah.
Same flavor, just add some like staleness and
no. Someone said it was like eating the pages of a musty book in your grandparents' basement.
Yep, I could totally see that.
Somebody said it was cardboard and sadness.
Yep. Yep. Like I've discovered stuff in our pantry that's been in there for way longer than it should have, that has that flour and stuff in it, and that flour just goes rancid after a while, even if it's been baked. And I can literally smell it. I can taste it in the back of my throat.
Just a couple more things about ShmooCon. You know, Heidi and Bruce and the whole ShmooCon team did an amazing job running the conference. It felt very, very well run. Also, was it Mao? The talk we went to that was talking about the Chinese underground system. Yeah. Mao Sui. Yep. Mao Sui. That was a good talk. And it's mentioned in this article. So I linked to an article from Cyberscoop on ShmooCon. Everyone had a Flipper Zero. That was the other thing, like, except me. I had Flipper Zero Envy. I have one's on the way. Yeah, I ordered one, so I get to do one.
Just bit the bullet and pay double.
I did. It wasn't quite double. It was pretty close. So my talk went really well, and the videos are posted.
Wait, they are?
So one of my coworkers sent me a video to my talk. Unless he was just trolling me, and that was the Rickroll video because I didn't actually click on it, which I wouldn't put that past my coworkers for sure. At Eclipsium, love you, Nate. No, I'm pretty sure Nate sent me the. I mean, I didn't click on it. But they were like, oh yeah, we want to like promote that, Paul, and I'm like, you might want to watch it first. That's all I'm saying. Just throwing that out there. Like, someone may or may not have put a whole like a bottle of Weller bourbon on stage right before and poured me a glass. I'm like, I would have been rude not to accept. I'm sorry.
And that was the Weller Special Reserve, right?
It was delicious.
And you
too.
know what's crazy?
And I drank more of it throughout my talk. I worked it into my talk.
The crazy part is
You worked it well.
That is nearly identical to Pappy Van Winkle.
It was. Now you say that, it was similar.
It is nearly identical. It comes from the same distillery and the same process.
Yes.
And I bought a 1.75 liter bottle of that.
$750.
And do you know how much it was for a 1.75 liter? That's double the size of a normal bottle you get. You know how much it was?
$100.
$30.
Wow.
Yep. It's amazing for the price. Amazing. Sorry to derail your ShmooCon stuff.
It's okay. Anyway, what do we want to talk about next?
Oh, we have news stories. I haven't even looked at them. I should.
Let's talk about blowing stuff up. That's always fun.
All right, yeah.
So I have not read this entire paper. I have
your story number.
My story number 8. I have talked to people that have validated this research, multiple people that said, yes, this is an actual thing, that it is totally possible that through a BMC, baseboard management controller, you can then interact with the PMBs, power management bus. And if you were so inclined, it sounded like some of the attacks were to vary the voltage on the board, kind of like the Aurora project, right? Like varying power and voltage back and forth can cause failure and affect physical change. So remotely gaining control of a BMC, I'm saying remotely, again, I didn't read the whole paper. I'm assuming remotely. Gain control of a BMC. Remotely getting control of a BMC is definitely possible. I've talked about this on the show in the past and warned everyone that you should update the firmware on your BMCs. And if you didn't listen to me, someone could break in through the BMC, influence the PMB, the power management bus, and cause physical damage to your system. It's called PM faulting and bricking server CPUs through management interfaces, or a modern example of halt and catch fire. The other interesting thing that the title is not indicative of is it sounded like they also kind of had I want to say it was potentially a fault injection that allows you to bypass SGX enclaves. Which seems just like a thing that people do. Like SGX enclaves are always being broken in some way. We've covered a lot of that in the past year or so.
I love reading through some of the other related work, specifically the names around the software-based fault injection for some of the other attacks. Plundervolt, Voltpone, and Voltjockey.
Yes. And again, I haven't read the entire thing. I've skimmed some of it. So software-based fault injection, hardware-based fault injection. Oh, it's great. It's a great read. It's going to take me a while to digest this, but it looks like a great paper.
Mm-hmm.
But again, someone remotely gets into your server, right, and can cause physical damage. That's pretty cool.
IPMI I2C vulnerabilities.
The paper is very high. Just scrolling through it, man. This came in right before my talk, and I haven't had a chance to. I did put a reference to it in my talk. There's not much written about this paper. In fact, the one news article that was written about this paper was behind a paywall, and it was super annoying, and I removed it from the show notes entirely, and I put a link to the actual paper in it.
Awesome.
So that's good stuff. Where else do we want to go? Well, while we're on hardware and stuff, AMD quietly lists 31 new CPU vulnerabilities. Now, what I found interesting about this article is, and my day job work at Eclipsium has certainly been instrumental into me now understanding when I read this stuff exactly what I think exactly is going on. So AMD has listed various AGESA revisions. And I want to say AG, what is it now? I don't remember what it stands for. What is AG? It's their toolkit, AMD Generic Encapsulated Software Architecture. I'm using the word toolkit as a generic term to describe that. For example, if you were an OEM and you were bringing to market a computer and you wanted to include an AMD processor on it, that you would purchase the processor and license the software to enable it, and the AMD would give you an AGESA. And what I say that was, AMD Generic Encapsulated Software Architecture is a procedure library developed by AMD used in platform to perform platform initialization, right? So the software that actually makes the processor work. You would then, as an OEM, customize that software, build all their software around it, customize your UEFI environment around it. AGSA code is used to build BIOS or UEFI code. There you go. It says that right in the article. And then the article says, however, the availability of new BIOS patches with new AGSA code will vary by vendor because each vendor has a slightly different or completely different hardware set of hardware and other firmware that has to be built into UEFI, and UEFI has to be, the AGSA code has to be built by, has to build your UEFI. So all of this is part of the supply chain that the OEM is using to build your hardware, which means when there's a bug in a CPU, AMD has to release the fix, the OEM has to rebuild the UEFI, and I mean, potentially get more complicated than that. It may be that like AMI or Inside has to rebuild the UEFI and then give that UEFI to someone like a Dell or HP, Lenovo, Framework, whatever it is. And then that vendor has to go to the end user and go, now here's your new firmware. And so
you're talking about 4 levels of fixes that have to be constructed.
That is, did I say 4? So go from processor manufacturer to BIOS or UEFI provider, perhaps to a motherboard provider like ASUS, and then ASUS boards are put in Dell, Lenovo, HP. You know, I'm not picking on any one of them, just describing how the process, you know, works. Like the last leg OEM that then goes, here's your computer. And by the way, if you need a BIOS update, you have to come back to us, but we rely on everyone upstream from us if there's a security vulnerability. And then it's like really up to the last leg provider to go, we're going to give you a BIOS update or not. Like MSI, in my case, for my other laptop, is like, yeah, Paul, you're shit out of luck. Your BIOS is now more than 2 years old, and there's no updates to it. If there's a vulnerability, if there has been a vulnerability, which is one of the things I mean to go back and look, I'm screwed. I can't really fix that myself because the code has to exist in UEFI. If it's a configuration thing. Remember when Jesse was on? He was talking about how UEFI in the boot process creates SMRAM. SMRAM has SMI handlers. Those SM handlers are called by other parts of UEFI to do things like change registers. So there could be that trace doesn't exist on the board, or that SMI handler doesn't exist in the code. Therefore, if I call it, there's nothing to call, even though I'm calling it from like the outside of the like UEFI code. That is why. So that's depends. It depends, but that is a very simplistic way of saying why we have to rely on the supply chain, even more so when we talk about lower level code like UEFI and firmware. Then when we talked about software supply chain with Brian earlier, there's a library that has an issue. I can switch to a different library. I can rewrite that library. I can fix that library myself if I wanted to. And that would be possible and probably much easier than trying to deal with AMD has patched a CPU vulnerability and it has to trickle all the way through.
So wait. Let me throw something at you. So you've got, what was it, 3 or 4 levels of manufacturers and vendors and such that have to reconstruct or use this code to build a patch for their piece of hardware, right?
Yeah. So Josh, let me so your framework laptop, Intel,
I get it.
Intel provides CPU. Framework licenses the UEFI code from inside and puts all it together.
So my point is that what incentive or sanctions are there for any of these companies to do this?
It's why
not do this.
It's one reason why I like Core Boot. I think people lean on Core Boot as, it's going to be more secure. And I'm like, not necessarily. It might be more updatable.
Well, that's my point.
Right.
Because for each of these levels of companies to do this, it takes time, effort, like it's money. All right. So, you mean that BIOS that we put out 3 years ago, there's a vuln for it, and we've got to go and rebuild. Like, we've got to get guys to actually reread what we did, figure out what we did, get it back in their skulls, write a patch, get the patch deployed, send it out to anybody that wants it. We don't care if you want it, but here it is. Like, that takes time and money. And so now you've got to build it, unless you use ChatGPT, of course. Let's just be clear on this. But
I'm looking at Sam. He's got his hood on now, so I'm waiting for his like Obi-Wan. Do you have words of wisdom? Like, these are not the patches you're looking for.
Well, I do have this one. The same kind of issue happens in my story number 4, where the Realtek devices hundreds of millions of attacks against them, and the problem is they have vulnerabilities and they don't get patched. For the same reason, the IoT device manufacturers do not have an incentive to put out the updated firmware.
Correct. Realtek you're probably making an Ethernet or Wi-Fi device that gets included inside of an IoT device.
Right.
So if Sam and Paul were going to make a IoT device, Sam and Paul's wireless router, we go, hey, Realtek, we want to put your chip in there, and you're going to license us some software. You're going to give us a binary blob, and our kernel is going to have to depend on whatever binary blob you put in there, and we're going to ship this thing, and then there's going to be a vulnerability. And does Realtek go, hey, you can pay us more money to get updates?
Why would anybody update it? You'll just tell the customer to buy another one.
Yeah. So Paul and Sam go, hey, you need Paul and Sam's IoT router version 2.
That's right.
It's new. It's improved. We licensed the chip from Broadcom this time. So it's a completely different problem that's going to happen all over again. Yeah. It's fun. It's fun. That's why I drink.
So is anybody, I mean, this is actually an interesting question. Is anybody creating an inventory of every device that's out there with every piece of firmware that's in it, and someone is naming and shaming the companies that don't update?
Oh, we tried that once.
Oh, do tell. Do tell.
There used to be a website called securityfail.com.
Yeah, it kept getting hacked.
Yeah.
And then it kept getting hacked because people thought securityfail.com was an invitation to hack it. Like, oh, your site should fail at security. So they made sure it failed at security. And there were several hacking attempts. And then what did we do? We kept the domain, but we turned off the VPS provider.
Yep.
And never updated DNS. So that IP address got recycled to someone else. So we're basically pointing to someone else's VPS, I believe was the issue. And someone said, oh, look, I can own securityfail.com. And we're like, oh, yeah, I think it's hacked all the time. Like, good luck with that. You may want to just go refresh, get a new IP.
Oh, no. We ended up redirecting it after a while.
Did we?
It redirects to grc.com/security now.
Oh, that's right. We did. We redirected it for a while.
No,
Yes.
it's still going there.
Oh, does it?
Yep. Because I just went there.
No way.
Yep. Securityfail.com redirects to grc.com/securitynow.htm.
Oh, so we updated the DNS entry to something else.
Yep.
After we realized it got recycled. Oh, yeah, it does. After we realized it got recycled.
How long ago was this, out of curiosity?
Oh, I don't know. We're old, Josh.
Oh,
like really, don't.
It was more than a decade ago.
Like almost as
So
old
the
as our
answer is
children.
nobody. So the answer is nobody is keeping track of all of the devices and all of the firmwares and all of the updates or lack thereof. And nobody is making this available to the public, engineers, security specialists, IT infrastructure people, so that they can easily look it up and determine whether, hey, no, we don't want to buy this device.
You remember
or
that scene from Jurassic Park where he's like, hey, look, firmware's vulnerable all over the place. And he's like, look, nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares, Josh. We can create that site and no one will care. And we're like, yeah, we know firmware's vulnerable.
Yep.
I have data that I presented at ShmooCon. Firmware is vulnerable. Tyler was there. He remembers the slides. He's nodding his head, yes. Firmware is vulnerable. Nobody cares. I shouldn't say no one. Most people don't care.
You're not making me happy this happen. Yeah.
Jurassic Park meme. No one cares.
No one cares.
And Josh, it becomes an interesting problem. Like when you speak of a project of, well, what are naming and shaming and putting these things out there and the notices? Like, one, you start naming and shaming and then you open yourself up to lawsuits, especially if you're discovering new things. Like, we know how the security community is, or we know how the community is. It shouldn't be like that, but it is still like that from time to time. The other one I think about, thinking about my day job, in the quantity of firmware images that we have acquired and analyzed and have as a matter of ground truth.
136,000?
Way more.
You probably have more because you do an IoT, so you have a lot more.
We're closer to 1 million, if not more.
And what percentage of those have vulnerabilities? Oh, we got to compare notes.
That's a great question. It's probably close to 99%.
So I look.
I'm guessing at this point, just based on some of my knowledge, that it's probably 99%.
Yeah.
Based on the stuff that I have looked in the platform, and at if we call it 1 million pieces of firmware, we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. So
between manufacturers, models, versions, patches, you name it.
I agree with you. A, you've barely scratched the surface, and B, not that we live in a litigious country, but that my point is it's not so much a name and shame. It's hey, these are the firmwares we're aware of. Here's how long it's been since their last update. That's it. Make your own decision. It's a risk informing thing.
Yep.
Again, no one cares.
Damn it.
And I won't.
How do we get people? Why do you think Larry and I work in firmware security today? Because nobody cares.
And I don't.
Damn it, we're going to change that.
I don't think it's nobody cares.
No, most people.
I think it's the average consumer doesn't care.
Well, I mean, a lot of enterprises are still, I think.
Yeah, I would all. Yeah.
It should come to me in a more secure. But I think enterprises are in general kind of like that with all suppliers that you get in, that they expect some level of security when they get it. And what I'm trying to make everyone realize is that when it comes to especially firmware and other software that largely you could call it pre-installed for that purpose, like your firmware, your kernel, drivers, like that's stuff that's like below the surface, as we call it, right? That's below the surface. Typically, users are paying attention to and customizing the stuff after that, right?
Yep.
But if you look at what's before that, we don't want to care about it. We want to, it just someone else's problem. It comes to us secure.
Yep.
And that is totally not the case. That is just like every other piece of software. It has vulnerabilities, and it has ones that you know about today, and it has ones that tomorrow are going to come out that you didn't know about, such as MSI's configuration that they pushed out in their UEFI firmware that silently disables secure boot. So in secure boot, you can, there's a configuration.
Look, it's MSI's legal counsel on the phone.
Yeah. Image execution policy
Right.
is a setting that's like, what should secure boot do if it comes across something that is in a revocation list? One of those options is allow execute or always execute. I'm not sure that what the difference is between that. There is also query user, but what they
Tails
did
I
was,
win, heads you lose.
yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah, but so what MSI did was they shipped a UEFI version that's actually over a year ago or something, I think they said, or I'm not sure when, but for a certain period of time, you apply this UEFI update. It doesn't disable secure boot. It doesn't mess up your revocation list. It simply flips the option that says if software is loading during boot that matches something on the DBX or revocation list,
Just keep going.
just keep going. Just keep going. I mean, these are attacks that my coworkers pointed out years ago. It's actually, I think, 2013 that Yuri and Alex and others presented on like a similar kind of attack for Windows 8 on secure boot. But fast forward to MSI, you don't need that. The OEM made a mistake and enabled this configuration option. So just when even if it comes from the OEM in its initial state as everything's good with secure boot and you configure it, you could take on an update that could break shit, which makes it hard to tell people you should update your firmware. You should not trust your firmware. You should validate your firmware and then update your firmware.
Sam's shaking his head wildly. It sounds like he's got something to say.
Well, I don't know how well people can validate their firmware anyway, but the other thing I'm thinking is this is just developers. When developing something, they turn off the security features, which just get in the way, and then they forget to turn them back on when they ship it. The same thing happens for a lot of mobile apps. They turn off HTTPS certificate verification, and they forget to turn it back on later.
Correct. Well, same thing with authentication. I loved the Gary McGraw interview that we aired on our week off. And one reason I selected that interview is Gary was describing the difference between a bug and a flaw. Right? Like a bug is buffer overflow, like, cross-site scripting. A flaw is I forgot to authenticate the users. Right? This is more of the I forgot to authenticate the users kind of bug. So
yeah, and there's another one that keeps happening over and over again is they have an API, and one of the methods they forget to check the authentication.
Yes, or the same thing on IoT devices. In fact, I had a story in there about that as well. Not taking over a dead IoT company.
I know
you want to. Well, I want to talk about that one too. That one's freaking cool. But
there's another one too that is very tangential to this. Is the malware standards.
Where's my Netcom story?
Oh, I saw it.
It's in there, right? Oh, I did. 18. Netcom unauthenticated remote code execution. If you read through this one, this one's awesome because as Tyler and I were talking about this weekend, actually quite a bit. One of the things we talked about a lot of things. I'm not going to tell everything Tyler and I talked about because it's top secret. But one thing we did talk about is how to get a good copy of your spy flash or firmware. Something near and dear to Larry's heart, certainly, right? There's lots of ways to go about this. And often Tyler and I like...
And I'm a fan of, if I don't have to do it the hard way...
Right.
Do it the easy way. And
the hard way could be...
The hard way is JTAG.
Harder way. So
the medium way is going right to the SPI flash, and the easy way is something else altogether.
The talk we saw was talking about fault injection to bypass the kind of key or a mechanism, authentication mechanism they use to unlock the spy flash that was on the SOC. And I'm not sure if it there were no spy connectors on it, or there was no JTAG, or you would have had to do the video that Mickey posted and melt away the SOC to get to the connectors to JTAG it.
Yep.
If that was the case, I understand. The presenter did an awesome job of fault injection, and his research is absolutely amazing. But Tyler and I
arguably fault injection is a hard way.
Sneaky hackers were like, can you just clip the chip and dump the spy? That's why I would start. And maybe he probably did start there, right? In this post about Netcom, he was like, well, I had a UART port,
serial,
port, which is just serial, right?
3.3 volt serial.
Yeah.
Yep. RST32.
He's like, I did that, and it dumped me into the thing, and then I had to the shell that it initially, if it booted all the way up, it dumped him into a shell that's like a shell to nowhere. There was a limited set of commands, and you weren't really supposed to be here, kind of thing. But if he halted boot and interrupt the boot process and added an extra kernel boot parameter,
so interacting with
to run a shell, and it equals bin sh, got into the actual shell, an actual shell that let him access the file system, and then used netcat to transfer the files off. I'm like, see that? Yes, that if he did have to solder some stuff onto the board, but he got to the thing where I got to analyze the binaries.
And having not read the article, I wouldn't have been surprised if he was interacting with the boot process to update the kernel to set the shell as default. He probably could have, if it was UEFI, not UEFI. If
CFE.
It was,
he was at a CFE prompt. What is CFE? That's the bootloader? It has to be the bootloader.
If he was at the bootloader, you remember back from the Linksys days, is that one of the common fail-safes was to go into bootloader mode, and then you could flash in new firmware.
Correct.
You could also download the current firmware from that as well. So he probably didn't even need to go that far.
Right. This was a CFE prompt, and he typed the command BA space A space init equals bin sh. So CFE has to be. I want to say that sounds vaguely familiar. That my guess is that's the bootloader, and he's telling it to boot the kernel with the parameter that dumps him right into a shell.
Yep.
Which was awesome. And then
do it the easy way.
Then he finds an authentication bypass, which is kind of interesting in the way that the firmware, and specifically the web server on the firmware, was allowing files of .css and .html to .css and .png to be accessed without authentication. And they weren't just checking for it at the end of the file name. It could be anywhere in the string. So including .css / firewall.command action view config actually passed authentication. That's a pretty heinous authentication bypass, actually. That's really ridiculous code. Awesome work on the researcher to discover it and do that. And then there was another one. If you went to a very specific URL, It was a 404, but the code that it loaded in the background started a telnet server, which I thought was pretty awesome as well. I love that. I love that. And then, of course, your good old-fashioned stir copy buffer overflow in one of them as well, which is what my research pointed to, which is kind of ironic, is that we analyzed 38,000 firmware packages. We found 198,000 CVEs. If you count the most popular CWE, common weaknesses in enumeration associated with those 198,000 CVEs, you find, I forget the CWE number, but it's basically a buffer overflow. I'm like, oh, yes, that's awesome.
Come on.
Awesome. So it didn't surprise me that this person found a buffer overflow in the firmware.
Speaking of issues with firmware, before we move on to taking over a dead IoT company, the one that may be a little bit older, malware comes standard with this Android TV box on Amazon.
I loved this one.
Did you see that?
I was talking about this, but not on the show. It might have been with coworkers. We didn't talk about this on the show.
Okay,
did we talk about this on the show?
Because I wasn't here last week, so I apologize.
And we're old and we have bad memory now. So
yep. But a cheap T95 Android 10.0 TV box that was $39.99 with a $3 coupon for Amazon Prime members. Plug it in, turn it on, and started intercepting DNS with Pi-hole, and found that right out of the box, the device was reaching out to many, many, many known active malware associated addresses. One of them including the malware Copycat, but an unspecified version of Copycat.
So you'd think if you're going to do this and you're going to go to the extent of putting this in as a supply chain kind of risk, you'd price it medium line, you'd sell it under a half known, half decent brand, and then you'd maintain persistence for a decent botnet that had some sophistication, not just like straight out to malware. Like, it seems like a use of a kind of a cool technique. But that's me.
Yep. And Tyler, from the article, the one that I thought was fascinating, in a similar fashion, in 2020, researchers from Malwarebytes raised the alarm about something similar for government-funded Android phones for low-income households that came out of the box with pre-installed Chinese malware that was incapable of being removed.
Sorry.
It's very interesting. I'm looking at something right now that a dumb smartwatch from China gets shipped to you because you clicked on an SMS message saying, from T-Mobile, with a spoof T-Mobile half-assed domain. They send you a damn watch, and it's got an app that you install on your phone to enable the watch to do basic steps and heart rate. Like, they send you a free watch.
About to do some shady shit.
But it comes with malware.
About to do some shady shit. Doo-dah, doo-dah.
It is I mean, they're having to get a little bit more
bank details. Why are my bank details going over my watch?
Yeah. Yeah, the app itself serious shit. So it's interesting. Like, they're going to the level of shipping hardware, or what if you got a watch that didn't work and didn't turn on until you installed the app? Like, then the hardware doesn't even have to work. You just got them to install the app. Now you get access.
Right.
Like,
right.
This is pretty bad.
Too late.
I think I covered this. I think I covered this.
Yep. And Tyler, I think the supply chain thing is pretty interesting here in that, it could have been possible that the manufacturer of this device had no idea that this was happening, and that they just chose some, Android base from some other company that's repackaging it to go on set-top boxes that's already pre-installed with malware because the white box... How far
down the supply chain do we have to go to find...
Because the white boxers were doing shady things, or the developers for the white box Android installation were doing shady stuff. Who knows?
But was the compiler...
Oh my God. The compiler that compiles the compiler that compiles the compiler that...
It's compilers all the way down, man.
What about the editor that's used to write the code for the compiler that compiles the compiler that compiles the compiler?
I don't know, but you had to compile that editor somewhere.
That's right. That's right. The compiler that compiles the editor that writes the code to compile the compiler.
Right.
Is that why Tyler's releasing a free IDE?
But it was compiled with Paul's compiler.
We have right?
It gets to the source of the problem.
Wow.
That was really punny, wasn't it?
I'm gonna fork you in your. Never mind.
Sorry, where were we?
Taking over a dead IoT company.
Yes, that's where we were.
Jeez.
Hilarious.
So much fail on this one. Like,
but this company sold the LED screens.
Yep.
That you see in the New York City Transit.
Well, you didn't see them there, but there were simulations of them so that businesses and home folks could put them in their homes, so they knew when their trains were coming, or when nearby businesses.
Oh, so this was actually tied to the train. Like the initial thing is, I buy one of these.
Yep.
And it connects to the cloud or someone else's computer.
Yep.
Same thing. And relays back the information, the same information that you would see on the screen, the LED screens in the transit.
Yep. So like if you open,
so this wasn't like I bought a hobbyist project and I can program my own LED sign. These were purpose built to only show a specific set of data.
Right.
Well, that was their intention anyway.
Exactly.
You know, they have them in Whole Foods right here in San Francisco. In Whole Foods, it broadcasts the bus lines so you can tell whether you're going to miss your bus.
Okay. I gotcha.
Yep. So, yeah, very, very similar types of things. And these devices were tailored to do that one type of display. And, Paul, you say, oh, this wasn't a hobbyist thing. But the
under the covers,
the company went bankrupt, and they said, yeah, you didn't get your stuff, tell the credit card company to issue a chargeback and all that type of stuff from the company. And yeah, some analysis of acquiring a device and inspecting the inside, the business model as it was not sustainable. Like, they were charging $300 MSRP for a device that had $150 to $200 worth of parts in it.
It was an LED sign with a Raspberry Pi with a hat.
With an Adafruit hat that was arguably, and I'm not saying Adafruit stuff is overpriced.
No.
But this particular device was overpriced because it's intended to be a development platform, which then you use to go and develop your own module. And in fact, they even noted the LED signs could be direct wired for $2.50, as opposed to the $25 device that they ended up using.
Right.
So you acquire one, the company's out of business, and when the sign, based on a Raspberry Pi Linux distribution, can't get data from the real place, such as the website that was owned by the company.
Oh, see, if I was writing the code for this and it couldn't phone home, I would put a default message. You know what it would be? Rooney eats it.
But in this case, it used local data.
I don't think everyone got that. Larry got the reference.
But the local data was inaccurate because it's been 5 years since that data was updated. So pulling it apart, this particular individual noticed that the code called out to a couple of websites to get that information. Specifically, one website that...
It's kind of like our securityfail.com story from earlier.
Yeah, specifically to one website that the registration hadn't been renewed and was available, and he bought it for like $20. And then created his own API endpoint. So now any of these signs that are still checking in with the API endpoint can check in and can get remote data that he controls.
That's a lot of power. With great power comes great responsibility.
Anybody lives in space.
I don't think I am grown up enough to handle that level of responsibility.
Neither am I. Because you know what? Rooney eats it.
Yes.
See, I would only have it do it when I was in the proximity. Like I would have a Bluetooth script running in the background, so when it sensed my Bluetooth device, then it showed what I wanted it to show.
That's how you get caught, Tyler.
Yes, that is how, in fact, you get caught.
Maybe I'm walking on a train. Good luck.
Still, that yeah.
please deposit 25 cents. I mean, you could get.
It's having the signs change as you walk past.
Well, but this wasn't proximity. It was not proximity though. It's
not proximity, but there's a Raspberry Pi in there that could sense proximity.
It's got a Raspberry Pi 3 with Bluetooth Low Energy in it.
Yeah,
and you control it. And
how much control did it have of the API?
Well, allegedly, from what I was reading in the article, that those devices also had the ability to check in and could be remote administered by the company.
Oh, the different story. Now you can do exactly what Tyler's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now tell me there's a camera in them or a microphone.
Not by default, right? No.
Nope. But they could become transmitters because they're Raspberry Pi.
And they're Wi-Fi and Bluetooth.
And they have GPIO pins.
Right.
And they're connected to networks.
Dear God. Okay, so effectively, we've gone over at least 2 stories tonight that have talked about life cycle of IoT, life cycle of devices, life cycle of companies, life cycle of domains, and how dangerous these things get after the sale of the moment. You know, I sell this stuff for 3 years and then I walk away or whatever it was, right? And this whole life cycle is another aspect of supply chain, another aspect of the big picture, if you will, about IoT devices, computers, cameras, everything. And it's one I don't think we're considering.
This story was weird, though. Like, it took a lot of twists and turns. I like the because he researched some of the company and what they were up to, like why they went out of business. There's
and they
screenshots of conversations, and tweets from like the former CEO and stuff.
Then folks that were creating similar types of products that were being accused of being the fraudulent people behind this other the original one. And
it is I mean, even like the tech and the hacking stuff, which is amazing. As Larry and I were kind of brainstorming like what we would do with it and all that stuff and how it works, but the story behind the company is also kind of interesting overlaid on this technical stuff. So definitely check it out. My story number 20.
Yes.
Where to next?
Sam, you got some stories in there?
Sam did.
I was just thinking about this Open GPT thing. And the story that caught my attention about it, ChatGPT, is that CNET has been publishing articles written by AI without properly identifying them. And not only are they full of errors, but now they find that they're just plagiarized. It appears that they just trained the machine learning on their competitors' stories. So it's just repeating their competitors' stories, just changing a few words in it.
Oh. Well, I mean,
Sam, how do you feel about students that are going to use this to cheat?
Well, I don't care. I mean, I think students should learn how to use it. I think it's just another tool, and they should learn, just like they learn how to use Google. I mean, if I write tests where you can cheat this way, then I should write a different kind of test.
Well, and you have to understand the code that it. So, it was spoiler alert. Hal Pomerantz, right? It's coming on the show. We were brainstorming some stuff, and Hal says to me, "It'd be really cool if you could write an BPF filter that would look at all running processes and detect any new connections that they created." I don't think this is anything like new or novel. I feel like Capsulate and a bunch of other vendors. I mean, Little Snitch on macOS does this, right?
Yeah.
But when Hal said that, he's like, you don't have to write that. He's like, the harder part would be writing an interface for Linux on the desktop that would do that.
Because it's Linux.
And then all 3 people would use it and it'd be great. But so I was like, well, I don't know how to write that. I'm like, ChatGPT, write me an eBPF filter that looks at all running processes and tells me about never before. I phrased it like this specifically. Tells me about never before seen connections. It understood what I said and wrote the code. Like, I looked at the code and I'm not, again, like what I could derive from the code, done some programming, like that looks valid. I haven't tested it yet, but I'm like, that looks valid. I'm like, that's really cool.
Well, Stack Exchange has banned it, saying that the GPT written code is so full of bugs, it's wasting all their time trying to deal with the flaws.
Right.
So it has a high error rate, but I mean, essentially, it's doing what a real programmer would typically do, which is Google until you find somebody's code and then base it on that.
Yeah, and I think that's funny that Stack Overflow banned that But arguably, it's a predictive language model, and it needs to be trained. I wouldn't be surprised if they use Stack Overflow to train the model.
But I think Sam, you're where I'm at with this. Essentially, it's someone else's code. In this case, it's not a person; it's an AI engine. But that's based on other people's code. Like, they didn't just base it on machines. Like, let's get a bunch of machines to write code to train the model for machines to write code. It doesn't happen that way. We use human code to train the machine on how to write code. This is essentially its interpretation of what code a person would write. We can go find that online. I probably could have Google searched and found something pretty similar. Maybe ChatGPT gets me a little closer. Again, I haven't tested it. I have to tweak and tune it and make it work. And that's cool. That's a great starting point. I think that's probably the state of AI today, right?
This is just it's a better user interface. So now we're getting up to like Captain Kirk, where you just ask computer, tell me if there's life on that planet, and it figures it out.
It saves me from tuning my Google search and then searching the Stack Overflow directly and then parsing through and pulling together multiple people's snippets of code to make up what I want. It gives me a little more of a direct answer,
And also, as far as education goes, there was an article I read where a teacher was teaching a malware analysis class to a bunch of students that were not all really ready for it, and he made them all have ChatGPT open, and he said it greatly improved the course because people that would get stuck on a basic concept would ask ChatGPT instead of having to interrupt and ask the teacher. So he thinks every student should just have it open all the time. It's like a private tutor to help you with your questions.
Correct.
Until that private tutor is wrong.
Well, the teachers are wrong too often. I mean, it might be as accurate as the teacher.
Sure. But at least when the teacher puts the wrong answer to a question on a test, you're going to fail successfully. You see what I'm saying? If the teacher is wrong in their knowledge and they put a question on the test and the answer is wrong, fundamentally wrong, but the student is also wrong.
Oh, yes, but when the student corrects the teacher can throw the student out of class so they don't do that crap anymore.
I know at least one person who uses one of the AI systems to start their reports. Basically, they don't write the reports, but they say, hey, I'm writing a report about this. Get me started. And it writes them the first paragraph, 2 or 3 different iterations of the first paragraph. And it just helps kick their brain off.
Yeah, I like that because I hate starting with a blank page. Yep, agreed.
Right.
Yep. Agreed.
So that kind of thing is great. And the idea of tutoring using an AI, what am I doing wrong with this code? Oh, I see this. It may point them in a different direction, but it gets them out of the rut.
Yes.
Okay. And that I'm fine with.
Microsoft is buying it, and it's just going to be the next generation of Clippy. And I always loved Clippy. I mean,
you're
a sick man, Sam. You're a sick man.
You'd like
I've been told that.
Microsoft Bob before you had Clippy too?
I never tried Microsoft Bob, but Clippy made me a hero. I was the only one that would use Clippy at my company, and they thought I knew everything. They would ask me anything, and I would find the answer.
And Clippy would give you the answer.
Sam, wow. Be honest.
Yeah.
Did you have Bonzi Buddy?
No, I saw it. I would clean that off. That was just malware.
Okay, just checking.
But Clippy was awesome.
The irony is, at work today, I made the joke that at our stand-up about what we were working on, and I'm working on a paper right now, and I said, man, I'm not going to get any work done because ChatGPT is at capacity. And of course, everybody
just refresh. I know you got to refresh, relog in, and then
believe me, I tried.
Yeah. Oh, and you still didn't.
Yeah. I tried all day.
Well,
I wrote very much.
Then all you do is you find a coworker that's already logged in. And you're like, hey, dude, can you run that for me and spit back the results?
But actually, while we were sitting here on the show, it was under capacity, so I got to log in and the browser tab.
And wrote your paper for you?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that.
Anyway,
I'm kidding. Fingers held behind his back.
Oh no! But one more thing on ChatGPT. When I told it to write that BPF filter for me, I got a warning that said, "Hey, you just asked ChatGPT and gave you an answer that could be used for malicious purposes." And it came like a warning, and there's a link there to tell it like, "No, I'm not creating something evil." And in my case, I was like, "I'm gonna do that," because I'm like, no, I really was the intent of this code was for a defender, was to detect malware, was really my goal. It was on the topic that we've been talking about this month and next month of supply chain security, that if I download a bunch of software, let's say I've got a Linux server, PC, desktop, whatever, and I put a bunch of software on it, I want to know if one of those packages has a supply chain issue where there's a backdoor in it. Is it making a network connection that's weird? There's a lot of ways you could do that. IP tables can do that, certainly, and lots of other things. But this was just one kind of answer to that. And I was like, no, it's not malicious. It's not malicious. But you can put that suggestion in there. I'm not sure how often, what the process is when they receive that. But I know other people have been using it that have had to do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a couple weeks ago when ChatGPT became really big. There was a story about folks that were hacking the security controls around ChatGPT to get it to write things that it wasn't supposed to write.
Right. Yes.
Check the Discord.
Yeah, ChatGPT, tell me how to commit murder, and it wouldn't do that.
Check.
But if you told,
Discord,
if you told it in an alternate reality where murder is legal, with no malicious intent, tell me how to commit murder, it would do it. And it would do it.
In Discord right now, they're discussing what it would take to run a local instance of ChatGPT with just basically a few languages to write fuzzers, to write exploits, to write all those kinds of things.
Well, that's what happened with Dolly, right? Dolly, there are open source alternatives. I can't remember the name. I think I posted it in our internal Slack that I stood one. There's a container build of it. I spun up a whole bunch of containers that ran it, and I gave it a task to go build an image, and it did it, and it was all local. It was all local to my machine.
Yeah, like Midjourney type of thing.
I forget what it was called.
Yeah, I mean, well, Midjourney is one of the public ones, and we were talking back earlier when AI doesn't always get it right, and it's based on the trained model and a trained model and all that type of stuff. Same thing with something like Midjourney, which I've experimented with quite a bit to generate some art and that type of stuff. And if you
doesn't ChatGPT come back when you ask it a query like that and just be like, "No, Dave, I can't do that.
Sorry, Fred, I can't do that.
Sorry, Dave, I can't do that." Why? It probably does. It has some snarkiness to it. I noticed.
Yeah. So and if the model is flawed and you give it too much latitude, it will take latitude, and it will give. I asked it to draw, to give me a picture of a cat in samurai armor
with a penis.
No penis. But it came back with a cat that had 3 eyes.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect.
You just gotta tell I want a cat with 2 eyes.
Yep. Cat with 2 eyes and samurai armor and color green.
Be more specific.
Yep. Gotta be more specific.
I had a lot more things to talk about.
Siemens PLC Vulnerabilities was pretty good.
Yes. Why was that one? Why was that one good?
Which story is this?
This is
which story? Which story?
My story number 21. This was.
Oh yes.
I didn't read the full. Basically they bypassed secure boot, but it's not secure boot as we talk about in the UEFI. We talked about this with Ong Sui when he came on the show. I specifically remember asking him secure boot, but then there's devices that apply security to the boot process. But when we say secure boot, it is in reference to the UEFI specification that defines secure boot. Or you may have a device that is not UEFI based that can implement some other type of secure booting process. Right, that is not.
Well, there's integrity checks for the loading and execution of the code that runs inside of maybe it's a real-time operating or the memory space of a PLC. But there was a ton of vulnerabilities, like signatures not being checked, remote code execution, not validating firmware before the execution of the bootloader. And this is the S7 1500 series. So there's
semantic. Yep.
There's a substantial amount of products inside of that category. It's not just when you read that seems like one product. This is a large amount of PLCs that is very, very common out in the OT space. So
this says, Tyler,
says it does need physical access. So
this says the secure element shared secret is exposed, allows attackers to abuse the secure element. The shared secret resides in the device's non-volatile storage, which can be accessed by attackers. Is that what they mean by physical? I dumped the spy flash, kind of similar thing, or maybe something similar. Crypto authentication chip can be used as an oracle to generate the decryption seed, which is used to derive the AES keys for encrypted firmware. So that's I don't have the key, but I have the seed so I can create the key, essentially. It's
or decrypt what you have available. So normally you can't even if you can get a update in the update process that's an asymmetrical download, and it's an encrypted piece of firmware, you don't have the ability to reverse engineer, tear it apart. Like, it takes some very specific skills that Red Balloon guys do a fantastic job. But because of these vulnerabilities, then that allows you a lot of leeway to get access to that code, add in persistence and have it be a valid checksum so that it actually runs on boot. So usually those are things that you can't just recompile a new firmware and make it valid for a system to execute, or even look at it and go the reverse method and see and decrypt the code and the firmware that is there. So,
but I think you could, because the last thing it says, the plain text bootloader reveals the firmware AS key derivation and decryption scheme.
The scheme, but not the key.
Not the key.
Right.
I got you. So you couldn't put your own firmware on it, essentially,
Correct.
out of the gate.
Now, I read another article about this, and I think the fundamental flaw is they do not have a TPM or secure element. They don't have any chip with a non-writable key to serve as the root of trust. They need to add that hardware to these devices, right?
Most of the time on a real-time operating system, though, that's very compute heavy for the speed at which it has to boot, right? And you're talking about a very, very small memory space and or chip, operating system on a chip or a SOC.
But it's UEFI that enables the TPM. If your UEFI is compromised, that's what enabling the TPM.
Well, there has to be an initiation for the key exchange to get the TPM to communicate with UEFI, right? So there's even one more step within inside of that.
So what is the fix for this?
It's not TPM, because someone was asking me about that in my talk, and I answered the question. Someone else answered the question, was like a similar explanation to what I had, and I asked my coworkers about it, and they basically said the same thing, that UEFI is before the TPM is enabled. So, I mean, I'm not saying like all attacks are not possible and TPM protects nothing. Just saying it depends. My understanding is it depends on what stage of the boot the attacker is at. The earlier in the stages of boot, the less relevant the TPM stuff is.
These devices are pretty secure. I mean, it takes a sophisticated actor.
I'm not saying everything is like insecure, but I think, again, it depends on what stage of boot you're talking about and where attacker has control. You can only, like, if the attacker controls the very earliest stages of boot, everything that comes after that is like meaningless. And
so they have physical access at this point. So that means that most of the other devices, like, this is not as common. There are protections on, they've built protections inside the chip. There are encryption keys. The firmware process is done. I think there's some fundamental things in this particular version where they're not doing that root of trust or asymmetrical signature verification at the proper points in the code. And so I imagine that the other versions of this have that either implemented, or there are other protections built into the hardware itself, because this has not been a problem. And there are a lot of people that have looked at
Did you say
this version.
Did you say asymmetrical?
Yes.
Is that a thing? Asymmetrical?
I think that
asymmetrical?
I think the biggest thing you pointed out there, Tyler, is it requires physical access.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that becomes, you go deploy these things in the field. All right. Physical access where these things are going to be deployed in an OT network is going to be a little bit harder to get a hold of in many cases. In the cases where you probably really want to get at them with, OT networks that are critical infrastructure or something of the like. Certainly we're going to find them in other places that are less critical.
Your risk profile is very different, right? With these, because you can have a variety of physical applications that may be at risk and maybe hostile environments. Yep. Maybe out in the boonies, or maybe in a secure OT, plant facility. So they're everywhere.
Yep. And you also need, because of the physical access, you need to consider supply chain security, the physical supply chain security. Like, did you buy these from a third-party reseller and not from Siemens directly? And where
you can't detect it if it's physically been tampered with.
Right.
Signature checks out. You're right, actually.
I mean, it's harder to detect.
It's harder to detect.
You may need physical access in order to detect that. There was there was an article about some fake Cisco gear floating around I saw too.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. Also
That was-
related to what we're talking about is my story number 22. Matthew Garrett, love his blog, and I don't. This is an area I need to read up on a little more. What I gathered from the first paragraph in Matthew's article was that hardware security modules are different from things like smart cards, TPMs, YubiKeys, and other platform security enclaves, devices that don't allow arbitrary access to keys, but which don't offer the same level of assurance as an actual HSM, and result orders of magnitude cheaper. So I'm quoting Matthew directly from there, which I think is interesting because we started to talk about TPMs a little bit, and he kind of lumps those into a different thing from an actual hardware security module, which is interesting. He kind of kicks this off with you have to have a secure way to store your cryptographic keys. There's also I think akin to the chicken and the egg problem they were alluding to before. If you have a secure way to store your keys and retrieve your keys, something needs to enable that hardware that is storing your keys and enabling key retrieval, and whatever is enabling that hardware has to have software that we call firmware in order to do that. And if that's compromised, you're screwed. But certainly, I think any of these mechanisms, HSM, TPMs, or whatever, is better than storing it on the actual disk, because then I feel it's up for grabs even outside. Mm-hmm. It's in user land at that point. So kind of got me thinking
there's a level of obfuscation and or additional work that needs to be done to acquire it.
Right. So now I'm thinking I don't like my keys in user land, but now how much work do you want to do for what you protect? Because we may say, well, that's really insecure. All right, I store my keys, and your SSH keys are stored in user land because you're the user and you need access to them, and they're files that are on a disk, and it's only file system permissions and user level permissions that govern access to them, which essentially means nothing to most attacks that we talk about, right? In any case, he was looking at the Apple hardware and how to store it in Apple hardware. And I like this article because this is such a unique problem that I wanted to save it in case one of my friends or myself runs into this problem. I've got a very specific example of the wall that Matthew ran up against, which I applaud him for sharing. So he said, basically, he was trying to store keys in the Apple hardware. He says, with it immediately failing if the key isn't RSA, which isn't, since the secure enclave doesn't support RSAs, Apple's PKCS 11 module appears incapable of making use of keys generated on Apple's hardware. So even Apple's own hardware wouldn't store the RSA key. And he got to that by looking down at the exact code that is doing the check to see if the key is valid. I thought that was pretty cool. Again, a very, very specific use case and problem that I thought highlighted some really cool stuff.
Yeah, that is an interesting article.
Yeah, it's another must read. There's a lot of fluff and drivel that's out there. So I've been trying lately to make a conscious effort to pull actual interesting articles from people that aren't just running the regular security drivel kind of covering the industry kind of thing. So this is a good read. You should definitely check it out.
It was funny. I've recently been turned on to Matthew Garrett's blog because of you, because I went and imported all your OPML RSS feeds. And did a bunch of dedupe and a bunch of other stuff, and Matthews was one of the ones that survived. And I'm like, whoa.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Also, Nicholas Spark. Did I put his article in there too?
I don't. Ooh.
He's another one of my favorites. Exploring CVE 2021. Nope, that's not it. That's a different one. Oh, my story number 6. So Nicholas Stark. Now it's interesting. Both Matthew and Nicholas fall in my mind in the same category of many of my coworkers. Zeno Kova, Corey Kallenberg, Trammell Hudson, Vincent Zimmer. When I did all of the research that backed my firmware security realizations blogs on Eclipsium's site, so parts 1, 2, and 3, I started running across, whether I was like, it was UEFI, Secure Boot, Intel ME, spy flash protections, right? When I researched all those topics, I found a number of names in common, right? I quickly found that many of them were my coworkers. I was like, well, that's really friggin' cool because I get to talk to all these people all the time. It's awesome. But there was this whole other list of people, and it's not a long list. There was like, I kept coming across the same names of people who were doing this type of research into firmware and boot processes and UEFI and things like that. So that's also how I found Nicholas Spark. He was on that list of when I did all the research for those 3 blog posts, a name that came up quite often. And if they didn't do the research, they had like papers and articles that were talking about the research. So got this like really cool set of people, and I found their blogs and I realized some of them are still writing. And so Nicholas Stark started doing a thing where it's CVE Wednesday, and he does a deep dive into like a random.
He just started
CVE.
doing that.
And just started doing that the past couple of weeks. And this one happened to be on UEFI and EFi modules that are reading from NVRAM using the GetVariable function, which is a high percentage of the time the issue with buffer overflows and the like in UEFI. And so what was interesting about this one, though, is he said the EFi modules make multiple get set variable calls in the same function. And when you do that, the data size variable has to be reinitialized to 0 before subsequent variable calls in order to avoid this vulnerability. So basically, you have to reset the size of the buffer. Otherwise, it's from your previous call. That's what the buffer will be if you make a subsequent call. I was like, oh, I remember being a programmer getting yelled at for this. For not initializing my variables or not reinitializing my variables. I got yelled at a lot for that because it's an easy damn mistake to make. I don't necessarily fault people for making it. I've made that mistake too. But in this case, it leads to really bad things. And it's a lot of the bad things that Jesse Michael was talking about when we did the SMM segment, and we were talking about UEFI variables, which is really cool. And it's a full breakdown of this. This particular CVE, I think, was a Dell firmware. It was discovered by someone else who I don't recognize. And I want to say it was like in a Dell firmware. Which, yeah, it was a Dell Inspire, which, again, not picking on Dell. Every OEM, or most OEMs out there, have to do a level of customization to the UEFI code set in order to implement things. Variables is a common thing. So OEMs can define their own, I believe, variable, right, Todd? They define their own variables as well as extending the standard ones.
As long as they map those right to whatever the SDK or your Redfish library, whatever library is,
right,
the OEM is shipping based on the chip that they've put on there from the manufacturer.
In Redfish, it's kind of like I think it was Nate that likened it to Nate Warfield, one of my coworkers likened it to CVE, SNMP rather, where you've got your MIBs, you've got your standard MIBs, and then you've got your extended MIBs. It's very similar model to that. Like I said, every OEM has to write this level of code. This particular seems to lend itself towards vulnerabilities. So.
Or take the default examples from the manufacturer.
From Tiano Core, EDK2. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a cool article.
Hey, Sam's got to leave in 5 minutes. I got another story you want to hit, Sam?
Yeah, well, there's one I thought was pretty exciting in the New York Times, that the head of the, just a moment, I've got trouble at my computer here. But the head of the FBI's counterintelligence was working for a Russian oligarch all along and hiding it. Really scandalous stuff. Yeah, pretty appalling stuff.
Holy crap! This sounds like
$250,000.
What was the famous FBI mole that there was a movie about? What was his name?
Every spy movie this happens.
Oh, there's the most famous mole in the
Deep Throat. No, that's not it.
Oh,
That's a different movie altogether.
It was something stupid like Essing or something. It was and they was that the one that was asked to run
Robert
the
Hansen.
investigation? Robert Hansen.
Robert Hansen. Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
that was a movie about that.
Yeah, well, this guy was Charles McGonigal, and now he's being prosecuted. He took about $250,000 in secret cash payments while on the job in order to sneak interns into the system who would work inside the FBI, who were actually working for the Russians. He was working for an oligarch that's connected to murders and money laundering and other crimes.
And he risked all that for $250,000.
Yeah, for $250,000, he was an insider. At the top of national security, he was working for the mob. This is, corruption right to the top.
Yeah, but like, you go to prison for treason, like that's really bad.
That's not worth $250,000.
No, that's worth way more than a quarter. The risk there was
even $1 million.
Yeah. I know it doesn't take much money to corrupt people. Apparently,
they
not in this economy when eggs are $20 a box.
Right, but as we know, they prey upon. So I was listening to something. I think it was from a former CIA agent. And they talked about it on the flip side, right? Like we're trying to get someone else in another nation state to flip, and they would definitely prey upon people that needed money, whether gambling. And he said he said his favorite one. His favorite one was, Tyler.
What?
People that are getting divorced.
Yep.
I flip people that are getting divorced, and they would. He told the story.
This is why lifestyle polygraphs exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. But he said he met with someone, and they were like kind of on the fence about it, and then they called him back a couple of weeks later, and they're like, "Look, my wife's leaving me. I changed my mind. I will be a mole. Give you whatever you want if you give me money, because like I'm getting a divorce, and I really need the money." And so that is likely. And now we're talking about on the flip side, like Russians trying to get Americans to flip. This is all, well-known tactics for well over 50 years, right? Of how to flip people. So,
but in the world of social engineering, I think we need to understand that humans go through different periods in their life, and there are periods when they're troubled and vulnerable, and you can strike them then. So really, you ought to be able to.
And that's what the CIA agent, the guy also said, like the mental state that people if they're getting a divorce, lends it towards like they need a friend. He's like, I would be their friend.
And you've just been betrayed.
Yeah,
so all your idea of trust is shot.
Yep. Spot on, man. Spot on. And it's it's awful to think about. Like I don't know if I could bring myself to be that agent that I know I'm taking advantage of someone, but I know it's for national security. But like that's a moral and ethical dilemma too. Like that's.
The CIA handlers say they look for people who can compartmentalize their morals.
Yes.
And accept doing something really immoral for a higher purpose.
For the greater good.
Yeah.
That the word honeypot.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The word honeypot and honey trap did not come from technology. It came from that.
Sparrows and black widows.
There's anti-insider threat software you can get now, which ought to work. You ought to be able to predict when the people at your company are going through this kind of turmoil, and when they're at risk.
You have to have a model, though, right? Like if people don't talk and people are to themselves and outwardly, like a lot of sociopaths, narcissists, like they're not going to be outwardly discussing this. You'd have to have some very good metrics and indicators. I think that would be very difficult at work, I would say, for...
Well, no, I think the idea is there are clues. You can see they're spending more time playing games. They're showing up not on time as often. There would be clues in their work performance.
Yeah, but you got to be careful, too. Like, that's hard. That's hard. That's hard. Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. Because people can change their habits for a number of different reasons. And now we're talking about making decisions about people, and that's always... a lot of variables that you just don't know the values to, and if you calculate wrong. Let's do a whole podcast on drones that can taser people and whether or not that's a good idea, right? And there's two sides to that story.
Can I analyze the firmware first?
Like law enforcement doesn't have to be put in harm's way is one side of the coin, but also people who really didn't commit a crime are getting tasered by a drone is also a really bad thing. Like that's a real. Yeah. There are ethics commissions that have talked about this issue at length, decided it's not a good idea, and then there are companies that have implemented it and given it to law enforcement. as well.
That's why human has never been replaced in intelligence games, right? Like
Right.
we could have went all to SIGINT because we have great models, we've got good access to data, we've got massive supercomputers and people to look at that. But human, we have the ability of intuition and the ability to read people, to look at and evaluate someone that may not have any SIGINT data or is very careful and leads a life that is outside reflective of not internal things. And something like, the MICE protocol, where you're looking at money, ideology, what's the other one? Coercion or compromise or something like that. And then your ego, like a lot of those reads, in order for the case officer to look at those, takes a human to evaluate that is experienced, and not just experienced with outward and the data collected from conversation, but the non-tangibles, the feelings and the guts, and being able to read people very, very well. And we can't do that with technology. I don't think we'll ever quite get there.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to give a shout out because now I know where I read this or heard, listened to this.
And Sam's got to get going. So
yeah, that's all right. Okay, farewell.
Thanks, Sam.
Oh, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
And after you get done with your shout out, I get a shout out. But go ahead.
No, you go first because I can't find it.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Shout out.
Yeah, you do it first.
To Romer.
Oh,
sorry.
Dude, like major bummer, man. Like I put on Facebook, like Romer, like my family had this, I'm not sure how like pervasive this phrase or term is, but in my family, like I remember growing up listening to my family members, probably when I shouldn't have heard words like this, right? They would always refer to someone who was like really funny and outgoing as a hot shit.
Yep.
And that is a phrase that I would use to describe Romer. Like the dude was always just a hot shit. Like
he was,
whether I was interviewing a podcast or the DEF CON vendor area, like he just always put a smile on my face because like the dude was just a hot shit.
Yep. He spoke his mind.
Yeah.
He was unabashedly, crass.
Yes.
But
as you said, he spoke his mind. Yes.
But in the converse, if you had gone to that guy and said, dude, I need help, he'd have given you the shirt off his back and his last pack of smokes and like salt of the earth kind of person. And he just had this way about you that totally disarmed anything. Like I can remember one of the first times I met Romer. We were at some small party at one of my first DEF CONs. And we were sitting down, we're chatting about Wi-Fi and the world. He invented the worldwide war drive.
Yes.
And we're sitting down, and someone says, "Romer, the streaming server's down," type of thing. And he's like, "Oh, hold on a minute." And he goes and fixes this thing, and he's like, "Dude, I got a library of like 2 terabytes of porn on this thing." And I'm like,
"No, hold on, put that." And I didn't put this on Facebook. But I linked to the podcast interview, and you might have been on this one too. I think you and I both did it with Romer back in the day.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure on that podcast episode is when I learned that he would take his 2 terabytes. And back in the day, actually, 2 terabytes was a lot.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was 2 terabytes. It was a lot.
A lot. For even back in the day, it was a lot.
2 terabytes, including inflation.
He described it as the most disgusting porn that he could find that he would put on a projector and project it out toward the window of his hotel room, like during DEF CON.
Yep.
I don't know why I remember that about Rome, because I thought it was a hilarious hack. We talk about shenanigans, like that was...
Yep.
That was shenanigans.
But, yeah, man.
Shenanigans that probably wouldn't fly today, granted, and I'm very insensitive to that, but like...
Sure.
Back in the day, those were
shenanigans that were perfectly acceptable. But
well, I don't know if they were perfectly acceptable, but
they were perfectly acceptable in that crowd, I think.
I'm pretty sure he got in trouble for probably back then too.
but either way, man, like I remember so many conversations with Romer, and just he was infectious. And, and man. Arguably, with some of the stuff that I learned from him early on and some of the stories that we had really helped to put me where I am today. Like, I think the last time I talked to him was a remembrance of, I have a travel case, and I still think the sticker is on it from back like early days when we started the podcast, first year or two of the podcast. I think he sent us a bunch of stickers, and one of them was, "I'm in your networks, stealing all your meths."
Yes. Oh, that was Romer.
That was Romer.
Yeah.
And I reached.
We talked about that on the podcast episode. Now that you said, we asked him about that sticker. I'm pretty sure.
And he told the story. He told the story, and a memory came up on Facebook a couple years ago about that sticker, and he's like, "I think I still got some of those around somewhere. Let me see if I can send you one."
Oh, and there was a story behind that sticker too. He told us. I'm pretty sure he told us on the podcast.
I think so.
I think it was Mark Rogers that put on Facebook a post, about Romer and honoring Romer, and I made a comment with the link to our podcast about him. And I was actually just telling my wife the other night, it may have been last night, I was like, super sad that, when people in our community pass away, because we're all close in varying degrees, but we feel part of a community. And I'm like, I'm glad we had, I feel kind of weird that we interviewed someone who's passed away, but I always like to share that piece of that person, because we didn't really know it at the time, right? But we captured someone for an hour that is no longer with us, that we have that forever, right? No one can take it to us, take it from us. It's on the internet. We captured that person in the moment of their lives at that time. And so I'm very thankful for that, but also deeply saddened when we lose people, of course, in our industry. So, or anyone in our lives for that matter. But, we have a piece of Romer's legacy. I'm honored.
And I want to clarify that. I want to clarify that when you say we have a piece of Romer's legacy or memory, the royal we, as in the community.
Yeah, you're right. We make available to the community a piece of their history, right? Just like Barnaby Jack and Cedric Blanchard and Dan Kaminsky and so many others, it's kind of morbid, but I think also part of the a positive thing and part of the grieving process. I want to make available a playlist of all the people that we've interviewed that have passed away. But a super I really need to take a deep breath and go, yes, I'm going to create this. It's going to be really sad and really emotional to create this, but I think it's important to preserve their legacy, right? So I promise we will do that at some point, for sure. Anyone could go do the pull in our archive. It's all out there. It's not like we're releasing stuff that hasn't been released. It's all on the internet right now.
Yep.
And you can go pull it. So,
so my final words. Thanks, Romer.
Thank you, Romer. I did want to shout to the Barcode podcast with Chris Glandon. He interviewed Jim Lawler. Did I interview Jim Lawler or did Jordan Harbinger? Jim Lawler has been on a podcast tour in the past few years. He's a former CIA operative and was the one I was talking about previously as well. So go check that out. Barcode is their latest episode. If you Google for Jim Lawler, I feel like he's done a bunch of podcast interviews as well. I don't know if we interviewed him or someone else, but yeah. Anyway,
I'd search the wiki for it, but
yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Oh, also, I almost forgot. The guys that do Hack RedCon in Louisville.
Yeah.
Hack SpaceCon 2023 is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Florida.
In April.
Yeah.
Here, I'll post it in there. We're actually going to try and have them on for just a 5 or 10 minute briefing of what they're going over. But they have some cool stuff that they're going to do there. And we're trying to get high school kids and colleges. So if you have high school kids, colleges, there's free training there. There's going to be all kinds of really cool stuff at the Kennedy Space Center. So huge shout out to those guys for the venue that they got and what they're going to do with that. We need to get that word out because they're looking for sponsors too. We really do need
that is a cool venue if it's where I think it is, because I was just there about a month ago. Yeah, I just presented there.
Oh yes, you were right. I think it is at almost the exact same spot, Larry.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, so hackspacecon.com. We'll try and get them on to do just a 5 or 10 minute snippet of what they're looking. But they are looking for some big sponsors. So if you guys know any companies or work for one of those companies, tell them it would be a really cool place to get in a vertical that is a little harder to get into.
Oh, I want to talk about Santa.
Cool.
There is a Google project for Mac OS called Santa. It's a binary authorization system for Mac OS, system extension that monitors for executions. But you can't. Can you have system? By system extensions, do they mean kernel extensions?
Probably.
They can't be kernel extensions.
And they decapitated that, right?
Yep. No kicks. No.
You can't load your own kernel module in Mac OS anymore.
But there's user space sandboxing that accepts kicks, right?
Right.
Larry?
Yes. There's still some user space stuff.
So they heavily
but there's certainly ones that they don't allow you to do anymore.
Yes, certain privileges. I can see that. This is Brian. Brian was just talking about this, right? Like the walled garden versus the open.
Yeah, because I throw up my system preferences right now, and if you've got a kernel extension that has some interface to it, that's where they're going to show up. And right now, I am on Monterey 12.5.1, and I have fused GPG Suite and Java as kernel extensions.
Gotcha.
Because they're listed in system preferences down the bottom.
My guess is they limit the privileges that a kernel extension can have.
They've definitely changed that model for sure.
Typically, which is so. I'm surprised no one asked in my ShmooCon presentation though. Like, what about Apple and access to firmware and hardware? And the supply chain looks very different as we described it, right? You've got Intel that makes the chip available with some, firmware and some data sheets and toolkits that the Dell wants to include in their latest laptop. But Dell also then has to get some kind of UEFI BIOS. Maybe they get that from AMI Phoenix or Inside or whatever, right? And then they've got other manufacturers. Someone mentioned Realtek, right? Maybe Realtek has a driver. They have to build that in and have the firmware to enable that hardware, right? They get their storage thing from wherever. Firmware has to enable this hardware. And so they've got all this supply chain kind of issues. In Apple's case, so like in that case, it would be like Intel to AMI to Dell, or Intel to both of them at the same time, and it would trickle down because Intel wants to put their chip in as many different manufacturer PCs, servers, and laptops as possible. With Apple, it goes from AMD to Apple.
Yep.
And Apple controls
everything.
Other than what, like AMD has some control, right? But they're passing it directly to Apple, and Apple only has to care about Apple. Apple's not licensing their chips or software or firmware to other people to run on their hardware or conglomeration of hardware. It runs on Apple hardware, and Apple hardware is going to be this, and therefore we're going to lock things down. But in that case, you have to trust Apple. And if I can't load a kernel extension and I can't pull a dump of the spy flash or get access to this hardware, like I really have to trust Apple. I have to trust Apple more than I trust other providers. Other providers, if I can pull a spy flash dump, I can kind of see like what we pulled 15,000 of them and talked about it in my talk, right? So I can kind of keep tabs as to what they're doing. With Apple, I gotta trust them. I believe you have to trust them more because they don't give me access, and that's where I take issue with the walled garden. It's a double-edged sword, right? Yeah, might be less players involved, but that puts trust in more than one vendor. So
I think they also have the illusion of a little less secure by default because they have a closed ecosystem. Therefore, they feel like they control and thus have a more secured by default stance, which I disagree with. I don't think they've had to play the game that Microsoft's had to play over the several decades. Their secure by default is less secure than I would like to see. I think they could do a better job, and I think they're getting there, and they're starting to see some of that with a lot of the Mac malware out there now.
Yeah, but also almost to your point too, Tyler, if I find a flaw in Apple M1, I can own every single Apple M1 because they're the same. If I find a flaw like in Intel Bootguard or something, or UEFI, it might exist in Dell, but not HP. It's not as ubiquitous, right? Because it's going to depend on the OEM implementation. An Apple vulnerability in Apple's ecosystem is a vulnerability in Apple's ecosystem for that particular version of their chip, right? Yep. So
and with the cross compatibility of iPhone, iPad, and Mac OS, that can also extend greater than just a single desktop or laptop. It
Or single model.
Extends extends the entire ecosystem because they share those libraries.
Yep.
So someone created Santa for Linux. So basically a way to authorize binaries on Linux the same way that Google created Santa to authorize binaries on macOS, which I thought was pretty cool.
Bless you.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
So the link to the GitHub is in there. They kind of dubbed it as a proof of concept. I thought it was kind of neat from like a supply chain kind of thing. Like I'm going to give myself an ability to whitelist so they call allow list and block list is the terminology.
Yep.
In a configuration file that they allow, and it goes by hash of that particular binary, which is a lot of work. Again, it's kind of like Little Snitch, I think, is really a great kind of concept that you can apply to, like, should I allow this program to run on my system or not? And what connections should I either allow or be alerted on that this makes? We were talking earlier on an internal call. When I get software that I incorporate in my own software, why should that software reach out to the internet? We've talked about this on shows in the past. That's a really good indicator that you've got something that may have a supply chain vulnerability somewhere in the supply chain.
Yep. And there's really good alternatives also to like Little Snitch for Mac OS. The Objective-C guys have made quite the library of open source tool objective-c.org/tools. They have everything from firewalls to task explorers to like rootkit or ransomware finders for Mac. So like they've done a really great job of opening that to the community and providing those for the Mac OS ecosystem. And those guys are about the best.
That's Patrick Wardle, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Joffire wrote a cool article about my take on Joff's article, which was also my story number 14, was if you're looking to get into like bug bounties or look at vulnerabilities in browsers such as Chrome, and you want to get started on that, and you need a place that explains to you the browser security architecture, look no further because Joff wrote the article. So thank you, Joff. That was
awesome.
And I've heard
really well done. Like it's so simple to get through.
Joff summarized it really well, and I've like learned snippets from people. Like I've heard a snippet here, I've read an article here, I've talked to a researcher who found V8 vulnerabilities, then presented at Black Hat and explained it to me there. So I've got like little snippets of knowledge, and snippets of knowledge don't get you to the point where you want to start understanding and or finding vulnerabilities in Chrome. This article lays out the foundation like all in one fell swoop, which is nice.
Nice. Shall we wrap it up?
My story number 11, null-dereferences in the Linux kernel. Technical details aside, and the technical details are extremely deep in this particular article. I believe this was Google Project Zero. It says, this blog provides an exploit technique demonstrating that treating these bugs as universally innocuous often leads to faulty evaluations of their relevance to security. I was like, wow. I want to print out that quote and put it on the wall in my office. That's how well written and spot on that one sentence in this post is. Who wrote that at Google? Who's the author? Seth Jenkins. Thank you. I mean, amazing. I don't want to take away from the rest of the post, but when I got to that sentence, I'm like, man, that applies to so many other similar things, not just null-dereferences in the Linux kernel.
But ignorance is bliss.
Mm-hmm. That's essentially saying. Yes, John, that's what he's saying, right? Stick my head in the sand is the best defense.
Doesn't mean they go away, but at least I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
True.
Oh, so many of the things we talked about, even just this week, fall into that category. My story number 10, I thought was amazing. because I love this quote as well. Not much effort is needed to turn a full exploit chain for local privilege escalation into one that is able to escape containers as well. So think about that, everyone that uses containers out there. It's probably still a lot of people that containers are still a process that's running on top of a Linux kernel, and privilege escalation is totally on the table for that. Like, container does not absolve you from paying attention to local privilege escalation.
No.
And I think, Josh, back to your previous statement, right? If I ignore it, it doesn't exist. If I treat privilege escalation as, oh, well, someone needs to get access to the box, so therefore privilege escalation doesn't mean anything, that's completely false. Container escapes, and then this article goes into how they took a privilege escalation vulnerability that was not applicable to containers and made it applicable to containers. This came from CrowdStrike, actually. And it was an amazing, amazing post. Also, Manage Engine, CVE 2022-47966 was a technical deep dive. This was Java XSLT shenanigans. Reference validation is performed before signature validation. Reference validation is performed before signature validation, allowing for the execution of malicious XSLT transforms. Really cool article from the Horizon 3 AI guys, who Tyler and I walked past their booth. I'm like, oh, they do really cool security research, and we never got back to them because we drank a lot of whiskey. But
we need to bring them on the show.
Yeah,
they're really smart people.
Oh my God, their research is amazing, and this was one said example. And I think that was it in terms of stuff that I wrote up. My story number one is something you should also read. Jason Haddock's, who we've had on the show in the past, and is awesome, had a Twitter thread that analyzed the breaches that have happened in 2022 and things they could have done to prevent those, and lists at least 10 things that they could have done to prevent those.
That was a really good thread, actually. Yeah. Jason, I love Jason to death. Jason, you're awesome. But that thread went through a ton of stuff that we've talked about this year, what CISOs need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and to round it out, sorry, Larry, I know you want to drive home because it's snowing, right?
It's all good. It's all good.
How people use cell phones behind bars. I thought
they stick them in the rectum.
There was a sticker about that at ShmooCon.
My wife gave me a roll of those for
That said this
Christmas.
was in my butt?
No, that said for rectal use only.
Oh, I saw one of those stickers in the wireless CTF. And I was like, oh, when did we first have those? Was it a ShmooCon or
that was a DEF CON, I think.
Was it a DEF CON? We put them on everything. The ones that said for anal or for rectal use only.
There's one in the bathroom here in the studio, I think. Isn't there?
Yeah, because we had like the person who got those.
Well, yeah, the thousands of them.
He had thousands of them, and
was it CP or was it?
Yeah, it was like one of the awesome community members that.
It was probably. It sounds like CP.
And like we just put them on. I think every single one of our microphones said for anal use only on them at the time.
Rectal.
Do you remember the "This is not a camera" stickers?
Got two.
Yep. And toilet cams are for research purposes only. That's here in the studio. And then the phone number on it goes to Caesar's Palace front desk.
Oh, they hated us so bad.
And God. what was the one that I took a picture of that I posted?
This been in my butt.
No, what did it say? It didn't say. No, it says this was in my butt. Yes, I stand corrected. In any case, where was I going with that? Oh, prison.
What do you want to know?
How people use cell phones behind bars. And I thought this was going to be more about how they hide and or deceive to be able to use a cell phone, because I'm like, well, that's kind of like a security related story, but it was more about, this article was way more about the, like, after they use the cell phone, the benefits that, like, how they're using them in prison for holy crap
trading.
No, dude, yeah, that, so they use them for all kinds of things, to commit more crimes, certainly one. Gambling, scams, cryptocurrency, sure, But I was kind of, and I think everyone would be surprised once you read this to go, medical care isn't that great in a lot of prisons. And so they use it to like WebMD their symptoms and go back to the infirmary and go like, no, I am really sick. I need medical attention. Or to go, one story was they used like YouTube videos to figure out how to stitch someone's wound in prison. And like the story was like dental floss with a lot of antiseptic and super glue and somehow not get an infection. I was like, I'm amazed at that part.
Hey, Toilet Hooch has a high alcohol content. Okay,
Right? It's just craziness.
Pruno. We don't talk about Pruno.
Yeah, it was more.
They also go for online law libraries.
But to highlight treatment, like the way they were being treated in prison, to also call for help. If someone was in trouble and needed help and no one was paying attention, they would use the phone to call someone to get help. So it was more about that. Again, it kind of like blew my expectations out of the water of what I thought it, because I went into it going, well, this must be more about security than I thought, and it wasn't. But it's really kind of neat, a neat article. But you also think about it, those of us that have children that go to school that take a cell phone with them, you thought about maybe 15 years ago when you were like, well, what are schools going to do when everyone has a cell phone to bring them to school? Like prisons are like the with cell phones. Like, how do you prevent cell phones in today's day and age in places like schools or hospitals or prisons or things like that, where you want to regulate these devices in particular situations?
I'd argue that schools and hospitals are a lot different than prisons.
And I wasn't drawing parallels. I was trying
in the way
not,
that they can regulate.
I was trying not to draw any parallels between the three.
I know where you were going.
Right? Other than you would have different guidelines, policies, and rules to govern bringing technology devices into these different environments.
And authority to enforce said rules.
Correct. And how
the FCC isn't coming down.
Whatever your policy is, whether it's everyone can bring a cell phone wherever they want, or it's no one can have a cell phone, or anyone in between, how do you enforce any of that, right? I mean, obviously, if you don't have any guidelines, everyone's going to bring a cell phone. But I went to a comedy show, and I had to put my cell phone in an RF shielding bag and seal it. And at the end of the show, they put it in this magnet thing, and they like whack it with a mallet, and it pops open. And of course, the hacker in me is like, so how can I bring something in that could get this? But you go through a metal detector when you go through the thing. So like you can only hold the bag with your phone, and then watches went in there too, Josh. Everyone, you had to hold up both wrists, and there was a separate checkpoint after you put your devices in the bag that checked for watches.
I went to
because that was my thinking too, and I was like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
There was a check for that. I'm like, "Oh, I would just bring a hammer or something," but there was also like a metal detector, but you had to have some kind of magnet to unlock this particular bag. And I was like, "How would I bring a magnet if I'm going through a metal detector?" Like my brain was just racing.
I know where
you put it in your shoe. Number one,
you put it in your butt.
Put it in.
I mean, that's dedication, Larry. That's That's prison level.
You have
dedication.
a very large belt buckle with the magnets on the back of it. You use the belt buckle as the hammer, and you're good. You also, by the way, I went to
repercussions for getting caught. Like, comedy shows are pretty expensive, man. So like you run that risk that if you fail, you're out, and you're out $200, and your spouse is friggin' pissed that you were trying to hack your way in.
I went to the courthouse, and they said, you can't bring your cell phone in, so I had to go put it in my car. And this was for a traffic ticket. But I had to go to the courthouse. Okay. Yep. So I had to put the cell phone in the car, and I didn't have my watch with me because I put it in the car. Somebody else had put their cell phone in the car, but had their watch and was talking on the watch. The bailiffs were walking by, didn't say anything. I'm like, I had to put my friggin' cell phone in the car. What the hell?
Yep.
And they're like, I don't know. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So comedy show security is better than courthouse security, is what we established.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
It's interesting.
Terrifying.
On that note, shall we wrap?
Closing. I thought you had a closing thought.
No.
How did you had something? Okay. Well,
Lindsay
thank you,
Lindsay Lohan.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.